What's up guys, it's time for another FM Virtual Stadium tour, and today we are taking a look round the San Siro, the home stadium of both AC and Inter Milan, or Internazionale, depending where you come from. And as always for you, my first fact on this stadium is that it was opened in 1926 originally, and it was just the home of AC Milan. Up until this point they had had several stadiums. They'd been moved around quite a lot since they were formed a few years earlier, and this was their first proper home. And when it was originally opened, it could only hold 35,000 spectators with that one bottom tier that you can see on your screens now. If I just swing round a little bit, it's pretty much the same design throughout the whole stadium. It's 3 tiers nowadays. I'll get into that in a minute because I'll explain to you why it was expanded, why it was built up. If I just go back into the centre of the pitch slightly, I can show you the facing grandstand, just to show you that it is all pretty much the same. Now before I get into explaining the facts and the explaining on why it looks like how it does, I'd like to apologise for the roof and the top wall. It's slightly glitched in my game. I don't know if it's the same in your game if you have this game yourself, but I'd just like to apologise for that because I know it doesn't look right. Just as I show you the whole roof, there it is, boom. But yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, first fact for you on this stadium is that, as I said before, it was opened in 1926 with one single tier. But in 1939, they decided to completely refurbish it because rules had changed and stuff. And so the capacity of it was upped from 35,000 to about 40,000 on that first reconstruction of it, the first of many at this stadium. But AC Milan as a club kept growing, kept getting more popular, and in 1955 they decided to put a second tier on the stadium, the second one there up until that very dark wall up the back there you can see. This increased the capacity to 85,000, but back then supporters were a lot more crammed in. They were allowed to stand and stuff like that, so take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, considering that nowadays the stadium's capacity is just over 80,000 in total. Back then they were fitting 85,000 in with 2 tiers instead of having the top one as well. And a little fun fact for you was that when they were talking and discussing about putting that second tier on, there were plans flying around for the stadium to hold 150,000 spectators in it, but the city of Milan and the club as well probably decided that that was a little bit excessive for the time, so they decided just to settle on 85,000, you know, as if that isn't big enough as it is. And then finally the third tier was put on in reaction to two things really. It was in reaction to Italy getting the 1990 World Cup. They were given it from FIFA, said you're allowed to host it. And the second thing, and it's sort of related, the second bit is that FIFA's rules and safety guidelines on having a stadium means that they had to change a lot of the design of the stadium, and that would have meant that the capacity would have come down right down to about 50,000, which wouldn't have allowed it to host that many games at the World Cup, just group games instead of last 16 and quarter-final games, which it did actually host in the end. So they decided to keep it able to do that as was planned. They put a third tier on it, and that was when they also input the famous towers. You can see it in the corner there. It's a lot more prominent on other games like FIFA and in real life, but on this game it's a little bit shadowed. They have huge towers in each corner, and they're really quite iconic. No other stadium in the world that I know of on such a large scale has these towers. Okay, apart from that, it's hosted 3 major European finals, the first of which was in 1965 between Inter Milan and Benfica. And I'll come on to when Inter Milan moved into the stadium in a bit, but I believe it was their home stadium at that point. Inter won it 1-0 in front of a home crowd, I dare say. The next one was in 1970 when Feyenoord played Celtic. That's Feyenoord of the Netherlands, or the Dutch team, depending on what you call that country, and Celtic of Scotland. Feyenoord won 2-1. And then in 2001 it hosted the Champions League final between Bayern and Valencia. Valencia won that. It was Rafa Benitez's first major European trophy, if you remember that far back. That was in 2001, as I said before. I come on to the naming of the stadium. It hasn't always been called the San Siro. It was named the Stadio Giuseppe Meazza, an ex-player of both Inter Milan and AC Milan at the time. And then finally, for the 1990 World Cup, it was renamed the San Siro. So there you go. On to Inter Milan moving into the stadium. Now the stadium was built as the AC Milan stadium, so they owned it. But they sold it to the city of Milan in 1935, so shortly after it was created, about 11 years after it was made, they sold it to the city of Milan, which was just before the first upgrading process happened for the stadium, when they completely rebuilt the first tier and put it back up again. And then obviously it got expanded in 1955, but in 1945, that was when Inter Milan moved in. So between the first set of reconstruction, the first set of rebranding, and the second set of building on the stadium, that's when Inter moved in, and they've been there ever since. Inter Milan and AC Milan have shared a stadium. To my knowledge, they're the only two major clubs in European football that do this. I know there's been talks over the years of Everton and Liverpool sharing a stadium, and other clubs in the same city doing this as well, but Inter Milan and AC Milan are the only ones to my knowledge that actually do it at this current time for major clubs. The last thing I have to say, I'm sure I've missed a lot out, but the last thing I have to say is that Inter Milan are planning to move to their own stadium. They're planning to move out of the San Siro in 2016 and move to their very own stadium, which means they won't be sharing with AC Milan, but there aren't plans for AC Milan to move to their own stadium. So it looks like they'll be staying at the San Siro. There is a lot of history on this ground, seeing as it's been around for nearly 100 years. A lot more than I usually put into my videos, I know. But thanks for watching it anyway. Please remember to check us out on Facebook, on Twitter. We've even got our own website. I'll put all the links in the description. See you next time, guys. Laters!